Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. In this video, we're going to expose a person called Blair Cottrell, who is the leader of the United Patriots Front Group in Australia. He's the guy that runs around and says, let's close down these mosques, let's stop immigration, let's ban Muslims, and so forth. Yeah, this is the person. He's just like another Pauline Hanson, right? So basically, we're going to expose the deceitful nature of these people. You know, these are the same people that go around and say, oh, our freedom of rights is being taken away from us. You know, we're just campaigning, and freely expressing our minds to stop Islamization of Australia. And, we're not, people are considering us hate groups and so forth, but they just can't tolerate us because we're just openly speaking against Islam and Muslims, and we're being vilified as racist and so forth. So they give this condescending view that they're not racist, but Blair Cottrell has been proven to admit that he was a racist in the past, and I'll put a hyperlink below this video so you can go and see for yourself. But interestingly enough, in this video, we're going to prove that he is a racist, and even his followers are racist to the bone. And through this clear proof, none of them can actually deny that they're not racist. Just recently, Blair Cottrell did a poll in his Facebook group. And the statistic poll suggests, and Blair Cottrell is asking his own Facebook members, should Australians take in white refugees from South Africa? Now, as you know, there are some white South Africans being persecuted in South Africa. And what does Blair Cottrell do? I mean, this guy was completely silent about, Middle Easterners being oppressed. He never spoke about, their well-being, and never spoke about how he had feelings for them. People are being hurt, these poor Middle Easterners. He never sympathized with them. In fact, he was totally against it. In fact, he was trying to close the borders and going against the Australian immigration policies and uproaring and raising awareness to close all the borders. But suddenly now, Mr. Anti-Immigration becomes, let's now open up the borders. And he asks, should Australians take in white refugees from South Africa? So guess what the polls have said? The polls have ended, and as you can see in the screen, we've taken a screenshot. It says this poll has ended 85% yes, 15% no votes. Can you believe this? So his group that is meant to be anti-immigration, Middle Easterners coming to this country, or Africans coming to this country, or whatever, they're suddenly now pro-immigration. They're suddenly, let's open up the borders, let's bring these poor white people here, let's give them refuge in our country. In fact, if you can see here, it got 4,700 votes. So out of 4,700 votes, 85% of the 4,700 votes voted yes, they accept white refugees from South Africa. Now, I asked Blair Cottrell in the same Facebook group, right? I said to him, if you are not racist, then do a poll that says, quote, should Australians take in black refugees from South Africa? And let's see what the poll statistics say. Do you ever think that it's going to be an 85% yes vote? I kid you not, it would be the opposite. It would be 85% no vote, and most probably I don't even believe it'd get even a 15% yes vote, right? So, but then these guys are the same guys that say, oh, white privileges don't exist. That's just a myth made up by the leftists. Yeah? But have a look. The polls, the statistics speak for themselves, folks. And you know what's even more interesting? You know, when it was against Islamic immigration or Middle Eastern or Arab immigration or immigrants we're taking from Syria because they're, fleeing from war-torn countries and so forth, remember all the excuses they used to make? For example, how they would say things like, there's no room left in Australia, how they're coming to take over our resources, how the immigrants are coming over here to take over our jobs, and how Australians should come first. We shouldn't be thinking about the immigrants first. We should think about the Australians first and their jobs. I think Blair Cottrell even made a video once talking about, we have poor people in the street. We have Australians who don't have government housing. Why are we bringing these immigrants here and giving them housing first? So Australians should come first. We should be caring about the poor of Australian citizens before we look at other immigrants. They would even complain about the infrastructure, saying that we don't have sufficient infrastructure and, our transport industry isn't working very well. It's under stress. It can't cope. Our taxpayer dollars will be wasted as our national debt should come first. They complain about our national debt, that we should first fix up our own national debt before we look after these immigrants and so forth. So all of these excuses after excuses after excuses when it comes to Muslim immigrants or dark-skinned immigrants or Middle Eastern immigrants. But now, soon as some white guys get oppressed in South Africa and they need to be helped, all of these excuses go flying out the window. So I actually raised this question to one of their supporters. So I went to the Facebook page, United Patriots Front, Blair Cottrell, as you can see here, Blair Cottrell, and I quoted this hypocrisy, how they made these excuses for Arab immigrants, yet they're not making the same excuses for white immigrants. And I asked them, were you lying about all of these excuses, saying, we can't take in more refugees because of all these excuses? And look at this sickening comment. Here, as you can see, Michael Rogsby, he says, look at this. He says, Mustafa Mohammed Sahin, he says, no, we lied. We just don't want you living amongst us, prick. So have a look at this, folks. He actually admits they lied about all of these excuses. No, we lied. Here you go, Michael Rogsby. You see that? So we already knew that, folks. We already knew that all of these notions were just excuses in order to stop Muslims coming here. It wasn't really about, they're not racist. It wasn't really about white privileges. It wasn't really about, about infrastructure problems and all of these other policies problems. It was really about Islam and Muslims, right? They just don't want Muslims and Islam here. So they admit they've lied their way in order to stop Muslims coming to this country. Full stop. That's all it is. When a person gets caught out on lies, what's the next best thing he can come up with? All of these excuses didn't work. About taking our jobs didn't work. About, taking our welfare didn't work. Spending our resources, taxpayers' dollars didn't work. We can actually, deal with our national debt and, of course, still help the immigrants. Of course, that didn't add up too. Including stealing our jobs didn't work as well. So what's the next best thing they could say is, the white people, the South Africans, the white people, they're actually compatible with Western values. And that's why we're opening our borders for them. But that doesn't still address the questions, because apparently the poor people of this country were supposed to come first, not other, white people who agree with your values. That's not. Apparently, your argument was the national interest of your own country members that come first. Now, you've even dismissed that, but now you accept people from South Africa to come here just because they are culturally in agreement with your nation. However, this can be dismantled as well, because what you just confessed was secular Western values is not tolerable to live alongside people who don't agree on every value. So what happened to living in a democracy and accepting to live aside people who may share a different freedom of expression and thought process? This statement of your only affirms the hypocrisy of such a notion under the banner of living in a democracy. The funny thing is, you have the problem with Islamic countries not accepting Christian minorities, saying they are not tolerable culturally of other beliefs. Guess that now puts you in the same boat. Additionally, what about all the excuses that were not addressed? So that was basically my counter rebuttal. They go around accusing Muslim countries for not being tolerable and not accepting, Christian minorities and so forth. But then they themselves do not want to accept the values and the differences of Muslim minorities. And then they have the nerve to blame other Muslim countries. And it's not really hypocritical at all, because Islam and Muslims and Sharia has a different standard. You need to adhere to their rules and regulations, and they don't believe in your type of democracy of free for all and so forth. So basically, when you start comparing yourself to an Islamic country, you're now diminishing your own liberalistic, democratic principles. And that in itself shows hypocrisy, because you don't even believe in that, and you want to suppress the minorities and remove them from Australia altogether just because they share a different view than you. But this is the interesting thing, folks. The Christians that they bring, the white Christians they bring from South Africa, does that mean that just because they come here, they're going to accept every single value of Australia? No, because I even know Christian minority groups, fundamental Christian minority groups, who are orthodoxy, not your, progressive, modernistic, secular type Christians who accept homosexuality. You have Christian fundamentalist groups here in Australia who speak vocally against the act of homosexuality, which is pretty much now the value and part of the culture of Australia. Got approved same-sex marriages. So do you now say, those Christian minorities should also leave, pack their bags up, and go to England or somewhere else? Why don't they say that to those Christians? I mean, do those Christians accept every value of Australia? No, they don't. Have all Christians in this country and have all white people voted yes for homosexuality and same-sex marriages? No, they haven't. The poll also gives many no votes. Do you now say, those people are against Australian values, so they should leave? No, you accept their differences. So why, when it comes to Islam and Muslims, that just because we have some differences on Australian values, you say, now you need to pack up your bag and leave? Notice the double standards. And then the next excuse they bring up, Muslims, unlike the white people coming here, the Muslims are bringing their terrorism here. Excuse me, your colonial white terrorists at the beginning, when they first arrived here, they stole the Aboriginal Indigenous generation. They raped them, ransacked them, committed the greatest genocide and terrorism. And then when they started to take over as authoritative positions in power and impose their own culture into this country, that being one of the colonial culture over the indigenous culture. They even interjected the English language and made everyone learn English, and they even did not practice the indigenous language of this country, so they completely override it with a different, separate culture. You committed all that terrorism, and then you said, oh, now we're just peaceful people. And then, yet you want to take a shot at some Middle Easterners going through the process of visa, coming to this country and committing terrorism, and you want to have a go and close the borders because of that, yet want to ignore all of the atrocities that you came here and committed terrorism. And by the way, folks, most Muslims in this country are law-abiding people. Okay, these anti-immigrant activists, well, I don't know whether to call them anti-immigrant activists now. Now they're activating the integration and inclusiveness, calling immigrations from South Africa. But they want to have a go at terrorists coming here. I mean, I'm for that, but we have a due process. We check the background. I mean, do we not put faith in our system to check whether this person is a terrorist or not? We have better capabilities now than we did. I wish the indigenous people even had the option of checking which of the white thugs on those ships that came here were terrorists or not. They didn't even have that option. At least we have that option to actually check who's a terrorist and who's not a terrorist. We can let women, we can let babies, we can let children in. But you're saying, no, stop it completely. We're not letting in any immigrants from the Middle East. And see the double standards. Which draws us to the conclusion that not all Muslims are terrorists in this country. And most of the citizens, that, including the immigrants who come here, are law-abiding citizens. I mean, do you send back all the criminals from the whites back to the United Kingdom, the motherland? You know, the last time I checked, your priests and bishops from the Catholic Church were abusing children. Do you go down and protest and shut down their churches and say, oh, we need to now do surveillance and stop any more cathedrals being built under the name of Catholicism? No, you don't do that. Why? Why do you then go and attack a minority group like Islam and Muslims and want to close down mosques? Why the double standards? See, Blair Cottrell and his folks can't answer those questions because they're biased, they're full of hate, and they want to cause division amongst Muslims and non-Muslims because they can't stand the fact that it goes against their notion that Islam is a terrorist cult religion, right? When they see Muslims and Christians and atheists get along together harmoniously in this country, it frustrates them, it infuriates them. It proves their notion about Islam not being tolerant of other faiths. You know, it proves them to be wrong because when they see us get along, it just frustrates them. So they create all this misconception, these lies, these dilemmas to then cause division and hatred between Muslims and non-Muslims because that's what they want to do. They're just like ISIS. They're like the ISIS terrorists, right? And, you know, you have the ISIS terrorists who say, all infidels, they all hate you. They're all your enemy. We must fight them. We must kill them, right? And what Blair Cottrell and the United Patriots Front do, they do the same. They say, oh, all these Muslims are infidels and they just basically want to kill you and want to take over your Western civilization and they don't want to live in harmony and they want to impose their Sharia upon you. Yet we don't even have a Sharia majority, calling for Sharia majority in this country. There is one group calling for Sharia in this country, and that's Hizb ut-Tahrir. That is the only group, and it's a minority group. But then they look at this group, they look at a few thugs in Lakemba in Sydney saying the kuffar are this and the kuffar are that, and then they're concluding to say, oh, well, all Muslims must be like this. See the confusion that they cause? It's interesting, another anti-Islamist from Blair Cottrell's Facebook group said, oh, you Muslims want to take over our culture and, do young marriages. And I said to him, excuse me, young marriages? I mean, which Muslim wants to do young marriages in Australia? I mean, do majority of Muslims go against the Australian Constitution and go against the age of consent in this country? No. So how do you paint every Muslim with the same brush? By quoting a single imam that apparently, did a marriage ceremony, where he wedded a girl to a man where the girl was under the age of consent. So then they look at that and then they paint all the Muslims to say, oh, look, all Muslims must be trying to put Sharia into this country. I mean, how dare you? Can you imagine if I said there is a cultural problem within the Catholic Church and they're pretty much putting their cultural sexual desires, which is deeply rooted in the Catholic Church, and they're raping boys and little girls? Do we say, oh, the Catholic Church is trying to culturally manipulate our children into young sexual intimacy? Do we say that? And do we say, let's now kick them out? No, you put them in jail, you prosecute them. So why don't you just do that with Muslims who actually, whether they're imams or whatever, who go against the the Constitution of Australia? Jail them. Simple as that. I mean, but you go beyond that. You say, well, I'm not just going to jail them, I'm going to ban all Muslims from Australia and we need to kick them out of Australia. I mean, do you see the hypocrisy and the double standards when it comes to judging Muslims and when it comes to judging non-Muslims and white people? So yes, this is clear white privileges, one standard for Muslim minorities, another standard for Christian white criminals. Another member of the Australian Patriots Front says, United Patriots Front. He says, how Australia is such a diverse country. It's the only country that has such a diversity and of races and so forth. And I said, that's what the Patriots wish to remove. As they say, we are one culture, not many different ones. Thus, they promote intoleration for why they petition for the banning of mosques. And it's funny because they spoke about grooming gangs, that Muslims indulge themselves with a lot of grooming gangs, and that's why we shouldn't bring them to Australia. But what you did was you brought all the Catholics to this country, and you have most of the grooming gangs working in operation through their churches. And it's funny because I've actually got a statistic here, and it shows the top 5 countries in the world that have the most child abusers, the grooming gangs, right? And guess what comes up as one of the highest, according to the Medical Research Council? It says South Africa, one child is raped in South Africa every 3 minutes, according to the 2009 report by trade union Solidarity Helping Hand. A 2009 survey by the country's medical research councils found that 1 in 4 men admits to raping someone. 62% of boys over 11 believe forcing someone to have sex is not an act of violence, and a third believes girls enjoy rape, The Independent reported. And I'll put the hyperlink below this video. So these guys want to talk about Muslim grooming gangs wanting to come here to have, to spread pedophilia. Yet what we have is these guys are calling for South Africans, white people, to immigrate. They're opening their borders to them. Yet the South Africans have one of the highest child grooming gangs in the world. And this is the cultural people they want to invite into this country. But when it comes to Muslims and Islam, no, we can't, because, they have a culture of grooming gangs. And this is the dilemma, folks. Do you see an epidemic of grooming gangs of Muslims in Australia? Do you even hear that in the news anywhere? No. So why are they even talking about it? This is the hysteria, the fear campaign they're just trying to promote. Arian says, for example, they're not racist. They just want to preserve their own culture. But you don't want to preserve just your culture. You want to diminish every other culture to preserve only one culture. You could still keep your culture and preserve it and live side by side with another culture. You're still preserving different cultures within the one country. No one's suggesting we get rid of the white culture and we only have a Middle Eastern culture. Who's suggesting that? You could have many diversities living in the one land, having their separate cultures. There's nothing wrong with that. Each culture can still preserve their culture and their heritage. So that's not an excuse. When you came here and ransacked the Aboriginals and imposed your own culture, did the Aboriginal culture completely diminish? No. We can go to some parts in North Australia and see a lot of the Indigenous people still being able to practice their own culture. So why now, when it comes to Islam and Muslims, your culture seems threatened, when that wasn't even the case for the Indigenous people? Now, was it? You still say, well, the Indigenous people still are part of the culture and they're allowed to have their own cultural practices, don't you? Another one actually wrote that they're not really like racist, but they're actually trying to promote a pro-Western nation in Australia, and they don't want something that's against the cultural values. They just want something pro-Western, a pro-Western nation. They're not against racists. They're not against Middle Easterners. They're not against Arabs or the Chinese or Japanese or whatever. They just want anyone can come here. They're basically saying, well, some of the members are. They're saying that they need to be pro-Western first, right? But this is really condescending, because I bet if majority of this country was pro-Western, but let's say they were Asian, right? And that the Asians were in the majority of this country, you know what they would say? They would say, we're being swamped by Asians. So please spare me the nonsense that you just want people who are pro-Western and you're not looking at their skin color. That's a BS right there. Because if we brought, if majority of this country was run by Asians, you'd be saying, oh, Asians are taking over our country, even if those Asians were claiming we're pro-Western. Right? So spare us the nonsense that it's not about skin color. You want the skin color of white people to supreme over all in this country, and you know it. Soon as a minority group takes position and it threatens your authority, then the racist true colors come out. We know it. So that's it basically, folks. So we've proved that these people, the United Patriots Front, are nothing but racist, and they've proved it through the statistic polls. And I challenge Blair Cottrell, I challenge him and his group that if you aren't racist, then do a poll asking whether they would be prepared to accept. Forget Muslims. Don't worry about Muslims or Islam. Put that aside. Ask your group members whether they accept black refugees from South Africa and whether they get an 85% like acceptance or more, as you have accepted 85% votes for white people. Prove to us that your group isn't racist. Set up a poll and prove to us that, the statistics are pretty much equalized between accepting whites and accepting black people. I mean, put Muslims out of the equation. And I actually raised this to Blair Cottrell and he would not budge. He puts me on mute and he does not perform such a statistic poll inquiry in his group. You know why? Because he knows that he and his members are racist and it's all about white privileges. Blair Cottrell actually writes on his Facebook, he quotes, "If what is happening to white people was happening to any other race of people on the earth, there'd be an uproar." So, right? But Blair is a racist. He only starts a humanitarian campaign when it only involves white people, yet has the nerve to talk about the uproar of hypocrisy of people not roaring enough when it comes to white people. Yet he showed no roar of his own when it came to the murders and genocides committed against Middle Easterners and dark-skinned people.